Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Heschel's The Prophet, which we have the pleasure of learning with Dr. Dror Bondi. This class is looking at how when Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is one of the, at least Dr. Bondi says, is one of the greatest Jewish American thinkers and social activists, understood the Nazis going to be in power, he decided to dedicate his PhD dissertation to the alternative of the ancient prophets of the Bible. And in 1962, he published an extended English version, which influenced Martin Luther King's fight for civil rights in the US. And how can the prophets help us today in our new challenges? And in this class, we will read passages from this work in order to understand Heschel's interpretation of the prophets as a source of his own actual philosophy and activism. And for those who have not had the pleasure with learning with Dr. Bondi, it is my pleasure to introduce him. He is very dedicated to bringing Abraham Joshua Heschel's thought to Israel, to translating his words into Hebrew, and to transforming Israel by his spirit. Dr. Bondi has a doctorate in Jewish thought from Bar Ilan, and his dissertation, Heschel's Hermeneutics, will be published soon, next year. He has also translated several of Heschel's books into Hebrew. He is the author of Where Art Thou, which won the Shalom Prize in 2006. He lives with his family in Jerusalem in Beit Israel, which is an urban kibbutz community of religious and non-religious Jews who unite in social and spiritual activism. Today is the first session of several classes, continuing from now until early December. And with that, Dr. Bondi, good evening. It's a pleasure to learn with you.
Thank you. What a long introduction.
It won't be so long next time.
Thank you so much. I will be grateful if people can get into the panelists room and open your camera, so I have the feeling or the illusion that I speak with you and can meet here, the web. We start today a series of 7 lectures about Heschel's book, The Prophets. As Kyla said, Heschel start writing this dissertation far away in Berlin, and they submitted it to the University of Berlin just few weeks before Hitler gained the power, became the Chancellor of Germany. And today I wanted to dedicate this meeting, this class, to the understanding of the motivation of Heschel to get into the world of the ancient prophets of Israel. Why he decided to dedicate his PhD dissertation to this subject. I believe that Heschel decided to do it as an alternative journey from Europe of 1930 to another kind of world. Just like young people in their soul today take their suitcase or their bag and go far away to India or to China or to Nepal to feel another kind of human existence, another kind of human perspective, because we feel today that something is we missed something of the human existence in our Western world. We understand today that we can learn something from the East, from Buddhism, from a lot of kind of teachings that are non-Western. Just like this, Heschel felt in Germany in 1930 that he want to go to another kind of world, he felt that something is sick in Europe, that something is sick in Germany, that our Western consciousness is ill. And he took his bag and go into the world of the ancient prophets of Israel, 2,500 years ago. He wanted to meet the prophets in order to open his soul to another kind of perspective. In order to, and he asked himself, why we are the Western deeply failed to fight against racism. Why we are the Western behave in such non-moral way. And he wanted to meet the prophets in order to understand what was their source to fight for the widows and the orphans of Jerusalem. What was their own moral consciousness? Why and how their standing before God helped them to fight for the poor? And after he hoped that after he meets them in the Bible, he can come back to our Western world and to open our souls to this kind of perspective. And when he met Martin Luther King Jr., he suddenly understands that, yes, there is a new kind of prophet. Yes, Martin Luther King succeeds to look the world from a very similar kind of perspective. So this work of the prophets is not an academic one. It is not a research about the prophets. It is invitation for a meeting, for a journey, for an opening of our soul to another kind of perspective. And today I want to share with you Heschel's own understanding of this journey. So let's start from Heschel's own dedication or motto, which he put in the first page of this work. I share with you the sources. Can you see it? It is large enough. It's good. Okay, I will be grateful if someone else can read the first source in a much better accent than mine.
Raise your hand or use the raise your hand icon, and I'm happy to unmute you.
Or ladies first. Judith, can you help us?
Okay.
How are you? Good to see you again.
Nice to have you again. I was very excited to hear you were teaching this. So this is Abraham Joshua Heschel, descendant of the prophets. Heschel's The Prophets, the dedication to the martyrs of 1940 to 45. Quote, all this has come upon us, though we have not forgotten thee or been false to thy covenant. Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from thy way. For thy sake we are slain. Why dost thou hide thy face? From Psalm 44.
Thank you.
Wow.
So, yes, Heschel decided to open his work, his English translation and edited edition of his PhD dissertation with this dedication. Of course, he added it after the Holocaust. The Holocaust in which his mother and his 3 sisters were killed by the Nazis. So it's not a general martyrs. He knows very close his family, which was killed, and of course, a lot of his friends. Yes, he grew up in Poland. He accomplished his high school in Vilna, and then he went to Berlin. And in all these places, he, of course, knew a lot of people, which I believe most of them were killed in the Holocaust. So it's not a general saying here, it's a personal saying, and it's a religious personal saying. Yes, this chapter from Psalm is a very theological one. It is a honest saying to God, in which, oh, what's happened? Are you with me? Are we online?
Yep, you're still online.
Thank you. It's a very personal saying and religious saying, deeply religious saying about Heschel complicated feeling about the responsibility of God and human beings for the Holocaust. Heschel say by this psalm to God, let's share it again, I hope it will work. Yes, yes, we have not forgotten thee. Yes, all this come upon us though we have not forgotten thee. Yes, so Heschel didn't try to explain the Holocaust. He only cried here. Yes, why dost thou hide thy face? Yes, he didn't try to suggest an explanation, but he also didn't leave God. He continued to stand before God and cry before God. Why? I don't think he believe he will get an answer, but he can't live without the question. Yes, this is an interesting saying about this work. Yes, Heschel tried to recover the world of the prophets while his own world crashed. His own religious world crashed. He feels that God hid his face from us, but instead of despair, instead of losing his faith, Heschel tried to bring back God's face by hearing his voice, by feeling his perspective in the words of the prophets. Yes, it's a kind of tchiyat hametim. Yes, it's a kind of very radical and brave step of Heschel. Yes, I feel that God hide his face, but I don't want to let him do it. I want to fight this hiding face, and to bring it back, to bring God's face back. How I will do it? By the prophets of the Bible. let's go back to their own world in order to feel God's face and recover his presence in our modern world. So why I called this class Descendant of the Prophet? Because Heschel feel like this. Let's read the next lines, the next sources, which are the first lines of Heschel's introduction to this work. Zeva, maybe you want to read?
Okay. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. Heschel's The Prophets, the first lines of introduction. This book is about some of the most disturbing people who have ever lived, the men whose inspiration brought the Bible into being, the men whose image is our refuge in distress, and whose voice and vision sustains our faith.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So every writer has one of the harsh decisions of every writer is how to open my work, how to open my book. And Heschel decided to open this work with the saying that the prophet is the most disturbing people. What a interesting decision. Why the prophets are the most disturbing people if, like Heschel continued to say, their inspiration brought the Bible into being, whose image is our refugee in distress. Yes, Heschel is refugee in distress. We read his dedication. Yes, he feel that God hide his face. But why disturbing people, the most disturbing people, are our refugee in distress? Yes, why their voice and vision sustain our faith if they are the most disturbing people? So Heschel was asked about these two points we spoke about, the hide of God's face and the most disturbing people, in an interview which he had in NBC just a few weeks before he perished away. We are going to celebrate his 50th yahrzeit. Yes, in this December. I hope someone will arrange something there in the US to celebrate this Yovel. Yes, the 50 year of Heschel's dying, and just few weeks before he died, he was interviewed by Carl Stern in NBC, and Carl Stern asked him just about these 2 points: how Heschel saw himself as someone who tried to bring back the prophets, and why he called them the most disturbing people. So let's let him to answer his questions. And anyone else wants to read, or Judith, can you help us again?
Okay.
Thank you.
Carl Stern's interview with Heschel, NBC, December 1972. Are you talking about a rebirth of their, meaning the prophets, knowledge in the mouths of others, or is that not to be? No, I mean an identification. May I make a personal statement here? I've written a book on the prophets, a rather large book. I spent many years, and really this book changed my life. because early in my life, my great love was for learning, studying, and the place where I preferred to live was my study and books and writing and thinking. I've learned from the prophets that I have to be involved in the affairs of man, in the affairs of suffering man. And I would like to say that one of the saddest things about contemporary life in America is that the prophets are unknown. There is a complete decline of the Bible in American education. No one knows the prophets. There are countless intellectuals who may be great authorities on literature who have never read the prophets, really, have never been touched by them. And this, I'm sorry to say, is a little bit of a disaster. The great examples we need today are the ancient prophets of Israel. I say that this book on the prophets, which I wrote, changed my life. And I think that anyone who reads the prophets will discover, number one, that the prophets really were the most disturbing people who ever lived. It's not easy to be oh, you mean they were abrasive when you say disturbing? Abrasive, disturbing, giving me a bad conscience. Well, are you a prophet? You've been abrasive at times, particularly concerning the Vietnam War. You've said a great deal about that. I won't accept this praise because it's not for me to say that I am a descendant of the prophets, which is an old Jewish statement. It is a claim almost arrogant enough to say that I'm a descendant of the prophets, what is called B'nai Nevi'im. So let us hope and pray that I'm worthy of being a descendant of the prophets.
Thank you so much. So here Heschel related to these 2 points. One, yes, that he believes that it is a little bit of disaster that the modern men in America don't know, the modern Americans don't know the Bible, didn't open their souls to the Bible's perspective. And he also said a personal statement that this book changed his life. We all know Heschel's marching with Martin Luther King in Selma, and now he says that before this work, he loved the life of learning. He loved books. He loved the study room, and this work made him go outside, made him march with Martin Luther King for the poor men of America, against the war of Vietnam, for the poor human beings of Vietnam. Yes, and then he used the term, the most disturbing people, which we read in his introduction, and Carl Stern can't let him continue. Carl Stern jump, and you can see it on YouTube if you want. Just look for Carl Stern and Heschel, and you can see this on YouTube. And Carl Stern stopped him in the middle of a sentence and told him, what do you mean by disturbing? And when Heschel explained, yes, giving me a bad conscience, yes, the prophets didn't let us say everything is okay. The prophets awaken our heart to see the problems of the world, the problems of others, to see how our world is far, far away from God, from God's demand from human beings, from God's believing in the potentiality of human beings to be good, and then Carl Stern asked Heschel, "Well, you made the same thing with the War of Vietnam. Ken Heschel said time and again that he can't pray in the middle of the war, because in a free society, few are guilty, but all are responsible. And because he feels responsible for the war in Vietnam, he can't pray to God. So he was abrasive, yes. And Heschel explained, no, I don't believe I am a prophet, but he called himself a descendant of the prophets. Yes, the Talmud said that all of Israel are Bnei Nevi'im, are descendants of the prophets. But Heschel explained that this is not a biological descendant, but a spiritual descendant. Yes, Heschel wanted to go in the way of the prophets, to be not a prophet, but yes, someone who lives in their own way, who tried to be a most disturbing human being. Yes, and so this work of the prophets is a kind of glimpse to the heart of Heschel. Yes, we can see what was his own motivation to fight against racism, against Vietnam. Yes, he wanted to be a descendant of the prophets. So let's read his interpretation of the prophets in order to understand his own spirit, his own perspective. Just like the prophets fought for the widows and the orphans of Jerusalem, Heschel's fought for the African Americans, for the Vietnams. So this work is very important in order to understand, in order to understand Heschel. We will going to read in our classes just interpretations of Hosea, interpretations of Jeremiah, yes, of Heschel to these prophets. But in the very sentence, we can understand that these interpretations are not bad interpretations, but Heschel's own understanding of his own mission. Yes, he wanted to be a descendant of the prophets. He called us to be descendants of the prophets. This work is not about the past. This work is a calling for a change of the present, for a hope to the future. Okay, so now I wanted to read with you another personal saying of Heschel about this work, which he decided to end with his introduction to this work, and in which he explained by his own words, why he chose this topic for his dissertation in Berlin. And Zeva, do you want
Yes,
to help us again?
Okay.
Ziva?
Yes, okay.
Sorry.
That's fine. The prophets, the final sentences of Heschel's introduction. What drove me to study the prophets? In the academic environment in which I spent my student years, philosophy had become an isolated, self-subsisting, self-indulgent entity a Ding an sich, encouraging suspicion instead of love of wisdom. The answers offered were unrelated to the problems, indifferent to the travail of a person who became aware of man's suspended sensitivity in the face of stupendous challenge, indifferent to a situation in which good and evil became irrelevant, in which man became increasingly callous to catastrophe and ready to suspend the principle of truth. I was slowly led to the realization that some of the terms, motivations, and concerns which dominate our thinking may prove destructive of the roots of human responsibility and treasonable to the ultimate ground of human solidarity. The challenge we all are exposed to and the dreadful shame that shatters our capacity for inner peace defy the ways and patterns of our thinking. One is forced astray.
To admit.
One is forced to admit that some of the causes and motives of our thinking have led our existence astray. That speculative prosperity is no answer to spiritual bankruptcy. It was the realization that the right coins were not available in the common currency that drove me to study the thought of the prophets. Every mind operates with presuppositions or premises, as well as within a particular way of thinking. In the face of the tragic failure of the modern mind, incapable of preventing its own destruction, it became clear to me that the most important philosophical problem of the 20th century was to find a new set of presuppositions or premises, a different way of thinking.
Thank you. Let's stop here.
Yeah.
Yes, it's, I believe, a very powerful lines, which may be relevant today, just like in the 60s, in which he wrote them, and just like in the 30s, in which he published the dissertation itself. Yes, Heschel felt that something wrong in our Western culture. Yes, that it's a great culture. We have a great science. We have a great human rights, but we have a great democracies, but all this is not enough. Our democracies failed to fight against their enemies. Yes, our academics failed to teach us the love of wisdom, and instead of explain us and help us to understand the difference between good and evil, we lost the faith in truth. Yes, and when you lost your faith in truth, it's very hard to fight against the enemies of democracy. Yes, we can understand. Maybe today we can understand it better than in his years, but for Heschel, the source of this problem lied in the very base of the Western thinking, and that's why he felt that his responsibility as a Jew is to find another source of moral perspective in order to help the Western world to fight for democracy, to fight for human rights, the Western culture is not enough. We have to bring back our ancient tradition, our ancient perspective. Yes, he was a student in Berlin. His daughter told me that someday he went to hear a concert in Berlin. Did you ever have you ever heard a concert in Berlin? And suddenly Hitler himself get into this place, and all the people, yes, you know, made they choose Hitler to be their leader, and Heschel couldn't continue to hear this concert. Why Hitler and him went to hear the same concert? What happened to us? What happened to our Western civilization, to our Western culture? Maybe then he decided that his responsibility as a Jew is to represent a contribution to the Western world. Yes, the Western culture itself is a very important contribution, but we have to learn from other cultures. Just like today, a lot of people understand that we have a lot to learn from the East, from Buddhism, etc. That something in the relations between body and soul is not good enough in the Western world. Heschel believed just like this, that he have to go back. He has to go back to the world of the prophets, and to come back with an alternative which will recreate the human solidarity. Yes, which will recreate the right coins. Yes, because the coins which the Western world used lost their value. Yes, they couldn't help us to stop Hitler. They couldn't help us to stop the enemies of democracy, enemies of human rights. So let's go to another world, to another premises. Yes, here Heschel knows that and very well understand that every view has its own premises. Yes, of course. But the tragic failure of the modern mind, incapable of preventing its own destruction, yes, made us, called us to find, yes, a new set of presuppositions or premises, a different way of thinking. In a sense, I can say that Heschel is a very unique Jewish theologian of philosophy, because most of the Jewish philosophers try to help us to live in the Western world. Yes, Rambam, yes, Maimonides, for example, tried yes, 900 years ago to help the Jews of his time to live in the middle of the Aristotle world, of the Aristotle science, of the philosophy of Plato, of the Islamic culture of his own time. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, for example, or Mordechai Kaplan, are philosophers who help us to live in the middle of the modern world, to explain us How can we live as a Jews in the middle of New York City or Boston? Yes, and Rabbi Soloveitchik help us to continue to observe halacha in the middle of the modern world, and Mordechai Kaplan help us to continue to save our peoplehood in the middle of the modern world. But Heschel is a very different kind of philosopher. Yes, is not his audience is not Jews who lived in the modern world and don't know how they can um, bring together their Judaism and their modernism. No, Heschel is an alternative philosopher. His audience are not include only Jews. His audience are the all Western people for whom he tried to suggest another perspective, a new way, a different way of thinking. And of course, in this audience, there are also Jews, but he didn't write to our identity. He wrote to our moral, universal perspective, responsibility. He tried to help us understand that Jewishness is not only an identity, that Jewishness is an human alternative, a contribution to all the people. And here, when the Western world failed to prevent its own destruction, our responsibility as Jews is to ask ourselves, how can we help the Western world to save itself? Yes, and Heschel went back far, far away to the prophets of the Bible in order to come back and to meet Martin Luther King and to march with him together with alternative source against racism. Yes, maybe we can compare feminism and fought for the rights of the African American, which occur in the same time. Yes, the feminism, I believe, was in the base a secular perspective. It tried to help us understand that woman is also human being. But for Heschel and for Martin Luther King, the fight for human rights was not a secular perspective, but a religious one. Yes, we need a religious perspective and even prophetic perspective in order to see the image of God in every human being. And in this way, our religious tradition, not only our Jewish tradition, also the Christian tradition and other religious traditions, is very important in order to recover our solidarity with all human beings, our understanding that God is the parent of all human beings. And this is why Heschel, this work of Heschel is very important in order to understand his philosophy as an alternative. I heard a lot of people who tried to explain why Heschel is a modern or postmodern thinker, why he is just tried to explain Judaism as a human rights, etc. No, here in this in this introduction, we can see Heschel with his alternative motivation. He didn't try to explain Judaism by modern terms, but vice versa, he tried to suggest Judaism, or here, the prophets, as an alternative perspective. Okay, last paragraph, and then I grateful if you have questions or sayings. Here, the last paragraph, the prophets. Judith, it's your turn. No one else wants to read. Do you see it? The prophet was? We can't hear you.
Judy, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, here.
Sorry. Okay.
So from the beginning, the prophets.
From the top, every mind operates with presuppositions or premises, as well as within a particular way of thinking.
No. We read these lines from
Okay.
here, from
The prophet. Okay. The prophet was an individual who said no to his society, condemning its habits and assumptions, its complacency, waywardness, and syncretism. He was often compelled to proclaim the very opposite of what his heart expected. His fundamental objective was to reconcile man and God. Why do the two need reconciliation? Perhaps it is due to man's false sense of sovereignty, to his abuse of freedom, to his aggressive, sprawling pride, resenting God's involvement in history. Prophecy ceased. The prophets endure and can only be ignored at the risk of our own despair. It is for us to decide whether freedom is self-assertion or response to a demand, whether the ultimate situation is conflict or concern.
Thank you. Yes, this is the last lines of Heschel's introduction to the prophets, to this work, which we are going to read. And here we can see his understanding of the prophet, as well as of himself, as someone whose responsibility is to say no to his society, to be critical about the sins of the society, to suggest alternative perspective, the alternative of God, to reconcile human being and God. Yes, God hide his face, but here we can see that Heschel feel that also us, human beings, hide our faces. There is a crisis in the relationship between God and human beings. And Heschel felt himself maybe like a matchmaker who has the mission to bring back God and us, God and the human beings, to feel the mutual responsibility for each other. Yes, the prophets endure. The prophecy indeed ceased, but the prophets endure, and Heschel himself is a descendant of the prophets who called us to choose concern instead of conflict. Yes, concern for every human being, concern for history, concerns for moral issues, concern for freedom. Instead of abuse our freedom, we have to use our freedom for solidarity. Yes, and this is the last line of Heschel's introduction. And in the next class, we will get into Heschel's introduction, the body of the introduction, in order to understand the terms by which he explained the prophets. He created his own terms in order to explain the prophets. And in the next class, we will try to understand Heschel's methodological way of interpretation, Heschel hermeneutics. What was his tools to take us back to the world of the prophets? What was his empathical way of reading by which he tried to reconcile human being and God by this very work? Okay, we have a few minutes for questions or saying if you want to add something or to ask. Yes, Judith.
I have two things going around in my head. One, I'm very moved by what we're reading, and it feels very contemporarily important in our age today. And then I have a second thought, which is that there is an assumption of accepting God's existence, and that we are dealing today. If we could address everyone who believes in God, we would have a nice audience to work with also. But we are also dealing with an increasingly atheistic population. And how does one present very important thoughts regarding what the prophets have to contribute without the reliance on, let's say, reconciling man to God, etc.?
If I can say, yes, Heschel doesn't speak in this work about the existence of God. Instead of fighting atheism, he tried to bring us back for a moment to a meeting with God. The challenge is not to prove the existence of God. The challenge is to make God relevant. And how can we understand that God may be relevant? Only if we meet him again by the prophets. Yes, by a journey to the land of the prophets. And suddenly, if one will, for a moment, will understand the importance of God's perspective for human rights, there will be we will not need proofs for God's existence. We will not need anymore to speak about God's existence. The challenge is not the existence. The challenge is the relevance. And the relevance can be understood only by opening our souls to perspective, to another kind of perspective. And this is the challenge of this work, not to prove the existence of God, not to speak about the existence of God. This is not the issue. The issue is the relevance. And let's see how God sent the prophets to fight for the pulse of their own times. And then we will understand the relevance of God to the fight against racism, to the fight for democracy. And, you know, in our next class, we will be here just a few hours before the election in Israel. And yes, as you said, Judith, it's relevant more than ever. And indeed, I decided to dedicate this year to translate the prophets into Hebrew in order to bring this understanding of the Bible, of the prophets, to the Israelis. One of the tragical situation in Israel is that every Israeli has to read the Bible in schools, in schools of Israel, not like the US. Everyone has to make examinations about the Bible, but the perspective about the Bible is a national one. We are the Israelis learn to read the Bible as a national work instead of a moral and spiritual work. And this is why I hope to bring this perspective to the Israelis. I only hope it will not be too late. So anyone else, if you want to say something?
Yeah. And if you're not a panelist, you can message me, or also use the raise your hand icon. Just because we can't see you doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. And for those watching on Facebook, if you have a question, feel free. Although it's been pretty quiet in the Facebook chat.
Okay, so thank you very much to everyone, and I hope we will meet next week to read the body of the introduction of the prophets. If you want, you can read it at home. It's not an easy introduction, and I will choose the most important paragraph, in my opinion, and in order to explain Heschel's methodological tools to bring us to the meeting with the prophets. Thank you, everyone, and be well.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bondi. Our next class as part of our fall Zman is tonight, Monday at 8 p.m., called Mapping the Rabbinic World, Rabbis, Demons, and the Babylon Talmud. You can sign up for this class with Dr. Sarah Ronis. Still, you can do so at the link at our classes page, which I am sending the link to, which is grisha.org/classes.